Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 92, The Gravity of Relationships. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the movie Interstellar. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing fine today. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in the writing world, let's see, outside of some early prep work for Zara 3, organizing documents, compiling notes that I've saved. Not much outside of that because I'm still in a holding pattern waiting for editor feedback on The Wrath of Sekhmet. So yeah, just sort of prepping for the next book and waiting. That's about it.
Okay.
What about you?
I am still not getting as much forward as I'd like to. Been doing a lot of sort of editing and going back and cleaning things up because it helps kind of keep me in the world. But other than that, there hasn't been much in the way of writing. However, I'm excited to say that in less than 4 weeks, I will no longer be doing my Uber services for quite a while. And so I'm really looking forward to diving in and really getting a lot of work done on Meridian, which is the third book of the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. So I'm looking forward to that. That's the plan, to, once I'm not Ubering, really sitting down and really plowing out a bunch of stuff for that series. I want to finish that book and move on to the next book, which is called Umbra.
So, cool.
Finish up Meridian, go into Umbra, and then the last book in the series is called Zenith.
Nice. I like that you have them all named out already.
Oh, you know what? I was so excited about it because I wanted words that were astronomical in source and that reflected in some way what was going on in the story. So apsis is the point in an orbit where you are closest or farthest from whatever's being orbited. And so that's where my characters are essentially close to where they want to be, close to what their goals are, and then far from them. And I wanted to reflect that. And then ecliptic is, when you're looking at a model of the solar system and you're looking at it sort of as everything is on the same level. That's called the plane of the ecliptic, as I understand it. Not an expert. Somebody wants to correct me, please do. Anyway, so the whole point of that story is that things seem like they appear to be flat and understandable, but they're really not, because the solar system is actually not laid out in a flat way. It's all the orbits are in different places. It's a very three-dimensional kind of thing. So, and then a meridian, of course, is the line of the meridian is the starting point or an ending point. And so in the story, this is where things change and in sort of the overall arc of the story. And then you can't go back after these things change. Umbra is something that's in a shadow or causing a shadow. And of course, Zenith is the highest point in an arc. So, and that's, of course, when the good guys win.
Yeah.
At the end.
That's cool.
So, yeah, thanks. I've
been thinking about my next books. I'm like, what are they going to be called?
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully, the story follows the goals of the titles. So we'll see. So as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon. And Mike's books, The Tales of Zara, will be leaving Kindle Vella in December. And so you'll be able to read the first book on Amazon as an ebook and paperback, as well as get the paperbacks from fine bookstores. And those links are all in the show notes. So, what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Let's see. I don't think anything this week. Yeah, I've just been watching Arrested Development again still, and that's about it. Nothing new and cool. How about you? Have you come across anything interesting?
No, watched Interstellar again, which I haven't seen since it first came out. So that was a lot of fun. I'm glad we're doing this podcast because it was really enjoyable to watch this movie again. And I did watch an episode of a TV series on Prime, or is maybe Paramount. It's called Elsbeth in New York. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's a murder mystery. It's a kind of like a female, a little bit like a female Columbo, sort of, in that the main character is kind of sweet and unassuming and, not real intense. The way Columbo was always kind of just sort of low key and laid back, but seemed to see everything.
Yeah.
That's what she's like too. And we watched an episode because some of our friends said that the main character reminded them of me.
That's funny.
I thought it was cute. I'm not a big fan of that kind of murder mystery show, but so I'm not sure I'm going to continue watching it, but it was cute. I was flattered by the comparison because this character certainly is a bright woman. So I'll run with that.
Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about Interstellar?
Yeah, I am.
All right, let's go. Today we're talking about the story told in the movie Interstellar, and I will read the short synopsis that is available on IMDb. When Earth becomes uninhabitable in the future, a farmer and ex-NASA pilot, Joseph Cooper, is tasked to pilot a spacecraft along with a team of researchers to find a new planet for humans. Did you enjoy this movie?
Yeah, I like Interstellar. It's a cool movie. There's a lot in here, obviously. Very sciencey, sort of science fiction story, which is cool. I like that. And then a lot of just interesting ideas, right? Like the planet that was close to the black hole. So brutal, but such a cool idea with the time dilation. Relativity is always fun. It's strange to think that it's real. It's not just like a made up thing, right? For movies and stories. Relativity is amazing and terrifying. You realize the horror in terms of the time discrepancies that would occur when you're dealing with vast distances, when you're dealing with, very fast travel, being near high gravity bodies like black holes, neutron stars, things like this. And it was neat to see that come to life on a movie. I don't know how much I've seen that much before. I remember we talked about a Stargate episode where they connected the wormhole through to a planet that was near a black hole, and they dealt with time dilation stuff there. That was really cool too. So anyway, that stuff is very fascinating to me. I don't know how fascinating that is to other people, but I think relativity is really cool. So I really liked that part of it. I thought trying to save the data of, the planets they were going to versus getting off the planet quickly, right? They go down to the planet and the water's there and they're trying to recover this data from this, person who had come before them, and the cost of that in terms of time, right? It's like, oh, we're going to be down there for a half an hour, but years are going to be passed for the poor guy that's up on the ship, right? So I thought, having to make that decision, I think was really cool. Some of the decisions they make in this story are great. They're very tough, and I think overall there are a lot of horrible decisions that have to be made. There's a lot of good, awful things that happen in this movie, right? Which makes it very interesting. Even they come across Dr. Mann, the one guy who's on the planet that's, covered with ice. And then they find out that he called them there, right? And he's basically just to get off the planet, not to actually have it as a feasible planet that they could travel to. And he totally, he was a coward who potentially would screw over all of humanity. So again, a nice, horrible twist. right? And then, of course, there's the heart of the story, I think, is the relationships that the characters have, in particular, Cooper with his daughter Murph, and we see like the messages from home that they get, right? We get to see the kids aging. You know, we see Cooper's father has died while he's away, and for him, it hasn't been that long. So again, it's like taking that science fiction aspect, the relativity aspect, and making it a personal story. I think that was key, because this could have easily just been a cold movie about science and science fiction, and only a larger tale about, you know, the potential end of humanity, but tying it into individuals and their personal relationships, I think was necessary to keep you grounded in the story. Let's see. Yeah, the tough decisions. I love that there was the reveal that the plan B, I forget if it was plan B or plan A, whichever it was, where the people staying on Earth were going to take the ship potentially and go out, that was just a lie, and he hadn't figured out the gravity, or he had figured out the gravity equation as much as he could, but he couldn't reconcile it with the quantum physics. I thought that was a nice twist. Like, oh yeah, you go out there and do this thing, and we're going to do this thing over here. And that was all just a lie. That was tough. So again, there's a lot of good, awful things that happen in this movie. And then I think the main thing is the pain they set up between Murphy and Cooper, her losing her father, and then feeling like he abandoned her, and then feeling like he abandoned her knowing that they would have no hope. Like, that was just horrible, right? To go through that, experiencing it from her point of view. But then we get to see it resolved at the end, which is good. I think how it comes back and we get that final moment. I think that ending wasn't in the original plan, wasn't in the original script, actually. And I'm glad they changed that, because he was just going to die or be left floating in space, I believe. So I'm really glad they changed that, because I think that helps wrap up the story very well. And it's one of those really emotional moments in the movie. And it's a good denouement for the story. And it's thought-provoking as well. It's like it brings the personal impact of the relativity to home when he comes back and she's much, much older than he is now. That was a great moment, and I think that was a great way to end the story. So yeah, overall, I liked it. I do have some thoughts about things that might be done differently. But yeah, I thought it was very good. I thought they blended the science fiction aspects with the human relationship aspects, and having a tight personal story as well as an epic story. I think it worked pretty well overall. What about you?
I agree. When I was watching it again, the first time I saw it, I really enjoyed it. And I watched it for the science fiction elements primarily, because big science fiction fan. I like the science fiction elements. This time I watched it from a more global perspective of the storytelling, and really appreciated, as you commented, about the interweaving of the relationships with the science fiction, the groundedness of the human heart, along with the epic story of trying to save humanity. And the first word that came to mind as I was watching it was elegant. I think it's a very elegant story. So I kind of parsed that out for myself a little bit. What do I mean by elegant? And I realized it was minimalistic, but not stark, if that makes any sense. It could have been stark if they didn't have any of the relationship pieces.
Yeah.
It could have been, like you said, just cold and stark, and it's just a science fiction adventure story. And from that standpoint, it would have been too minimalistic, because there wasn't enough heart in the epic part. The heart came from the relationships. And I thought that was just really well done. I especially love the moment where Cooper's trying to save the mess that Dr. Mann made.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Murph is trying to save her brother and his family. The editing of the overlapping of those two storylines together was so beautifully done. And it was so exciting. I thought that was just good storytelling, kept you engaged and kept you realizing the commonalities between these two estranged people. What tied them together was their desire to save, and the desire to save the people that they loved. And I thought that was just amazing to watch. I thought it was incredibly well done. It's an enjoyable story because of the relationships, because of the interesting science fiction perplexities that are presented. When I was like sort of watching the science fiction worlds, the color palette was all very muted. you know what I'm saying? We're on the world that's got nothing but water and the color palette is muted. Or we're on a world that's nothing but ice and the color palette is muted, right? So it's all very focused on the
Yeah.
people and not the places. Even on Earth, because of the dust, they were able to really mute everything and focus on the people. The only time it got very bright was at the end when they were on the space station where everybody had been moved to. And then we had bright colors because it was a bright future. I thought that was really interesting. And then on the very end, the planet where Brand landed, the color palette was more warm and inviting. And I think that all communicated what it is that was trying to connect us with as the enjoyers of the story. That the focus is the people until you get to a place where there's more hope, and then you can start focusing on the place again, as well as the people. I thought that was just fascinating.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that. I like that a lot, though.
Thank you. So let's talk about what we might have changed as writers. What might you have changed?
Okay, I have a bigger thought, but let me hit the smaller thing first that I think is easier to address for me. I think for me the story lingered too long in the beginning on sort of the setup of the world and the characters and the family relationships. It's like I felt like, okay, I got it. I got what you're going for. And then it just continued to linger on for longer than it needed to be. For me, I was like, okay, let's get to the Interstellar part already. Like, that's what we're here for. While those relationships were necessary and critical to the rest of the story, like I said, I think the heart is what makes this really work. I just don't think we needed to spend as long as we did in the beginning part. So not necessarily a specific change other than maybe just tighten up some of those scenes, reduce it a little bit to get us into the interstellar action a little bit earlier. The bigger issue that I had was near the end. I think as we've said, I think the movie is entertaining, engaging, it's very emotional. I think all that works pretty well. But the end felt very Deus Ex Machina. No, it didn't feel Deus Ex Machina. It was Deus Ex Machina. They basically were saved by these other beings, which may or may not be humans in the future. But Cooper himself didn't do anything intentionally in that moment to save humanity, right? If he had not been just gifted this chance by the gods when he not accidentally, but when he fell into the black hole, right? He didn't go into the black hole to save humanity. He ejected himself to give Brand a chance, right? Yeah, to get to the other planet, and maybe they could start something, right? But it wasn't his goal to solve the problem back on Earth at that point. So that was very Deus Ex Machina, right? It's just like, here's a solution. We're just going to give this opportunity to you in this black hole. We're going to create this tesseract for you. So that felt a bit of a cop-out. It wasn't his intended outcome, right? He wasn't saying, I'm going to take this chance and let's see what happens. I think, how do you fix that? Man, I'm not sure. I think it would require more setup, potentially a lot more setup, a lot more things to change. Maybe it could have been something where he figured out that somehow, they detected gravity waves or messaging coming from within the black hole. And he decided, maybe if I'm in the black hole, I could do something. Like if there was some kind of connection there where it's like, it was more of an active decision to just, well, we're kind of done anyway, let me try this, versus, hey, look what I fell into. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's hard to say because it's it's a tricky plot device that they're using there with communicating with gravity back in time, which from a scientific perspective that doesn't really make any sense because gravity is propagating with time. So it's like, how is it communicating through time? That just seems like a heavy fiction aspect of the science fiction, but that's what they set up in the context of the movie. So okay, that's fine. You roll with it, right? You just accept that as the world building of this story. I could kind of get along with that. But if they had made it more intentional, I think is what I'm trying to go for at that end versus accidental. I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but that was my biggest complaint at the end, just because, we talk about movies so much and I kind of look for that moment at the end where the character takes some positive action. And we'll get to this when I talk about theme. Those are the two things that stood out to me. What about you? Is there anything you would improve, and how would you do so?
My thoughts are actually kind of related to what you were talking about. For me, there was a lot of conveniences that I don't think were as well explained or grounded in sort of cause and effect understanding. So take, for example, Coop showing up at this NASA installation, and then they hired him to be their pilot. It seems convenient. We could have had something along the lines of, actually, we were just about to contact you, or something like that. Now, maybe they said that and I missed it, but I don't think so.
No.
I don't know.
They thought he was dead.
But then why hire him to be the pilot? It was just sort of weird. Just something along the lines that kind of got us from point A to point B of, oh, wow, you're here. Isn't that convenient? We need a pilot. Just something. You know what I'm saying? But other than that, well, we were gonna hire you. This is for you, right? So he shows up at this place where he's like arrested by TARS and they're terrified and stuff, and all of a sudden you're gonna fly a spaceship for us. It just felt convenient. There was something missing there.
This is one of the problems with time travel movies where you create time paradoxes, right? Every time travel story has a problem, either of a paradox or a glitch in the plot. It's unavoidable because of the nature of the story. And this is one of those moments because he sent the message right back in time, presumably to himself to go to those coordinates because he was going to be hired. So if he had never sent that message to himself, he never would have gone there. It creates this paradox, right? There's a number of paradoxes in this movie where it kind of breaks the plot if you think about it, and it leads to these convenience things. Yeah, that's
right. And see,
that is an issue.
I don't mind paradoxes because I'm okay with the whole you send people off on a separate timeline thing. So that doesn't. It was just the reaction of the people to decide to send him on this thing. That's what seemed. That didn't seem realistic to me. To have those people go, oh, you've invaded our spot. Great, we're going to send you on. Just a little bit more dialogue, a little bit more just coming to a conclusion. We're so glad we found you because they're the solution to a problem that we have been facing or something. I don't know. And maybe there was that and I missed it.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. Because they were saying, it's like, oh, they've been training people, but they weren't real, pilots. They didn't have the specific like astronaut space, flight training that he had beforehand.
Yeah.
But it does raise the question of, this wasn't a viral outbreak that wiped out all of humanity in a few days.
Right.
It was this thing that happened over years. They could have certainly had pilots since they were creating this program. Yeah.
Exactly. Similarly, like when Doyle died on the water planet. How is it that he couldn't get into the ship? It seemed very convenient to me to sort of eliminate these people one by one until there's only a couple people left and the fate of the human race is hinging on just these couple of people. And then how did old Murph know that Brand was waiting on a planet at the very end? You need to go find Brand. How did she know? So now what do I believe happened? I believe that Cooper and Brand become the ancestors of the fifth dimensional beings that set this whole thing up. I think that's the whole sort of causality loop that we're looking at in this story. But we're not told that. And you have to extrapolate it. And you have to kind of guess and figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been really easy for, as she said that, to show some kind of additional communication that she received later down the road that Cooper told her to tell him to go find Brand. Or the fifth dimensional being.
I just assumed that when they found him, they had received whatever the latest communications were that she was going to this planet as like the last.
See, that was your assumption. I went in a different direction. Whatever the reason is, it would have been really nice to have just a little bit of information that could direct us so that we know how Murph knew that.
Yeah, one line from someone saying we received this final communication from Brand that she's going to the planet. Done.
Exactly. So I think to me, what needed to happen here in this story is just a little bit more dialogue to close up some of these little holes. And that's it.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, that might be an artifact of them changing the ending of the movie.
It might be. Like, and it might also
be. They kind of like added this part on without, fully fleshing out the script a little bit.
And it also might be that it's just part of the very minimalistic approach that this movie took. The dialogue is minimalistic. True. The visuals, when you look at, I've got in front of me the cast list to help me remember the character names. And all the character names, almost all the character names, are just single names. Yeah. Cooper, Murph, Brand, Tom, Doyle, Man. You don't get Dr. John Man or anything like that. You just have these single names.
Right.
It's part of sort of this minimalistic approach to who these characters are. You have very few. You have Professor Brand to differentiate him from Brand the astronaut. I think that the missing dialogue that we need to connect these dots may be part of that sort of minimalistic approach to this film, which otherwise works really well because it helps that, again, like we said, helps that focus on the relationships. But I think because of that, there was just a little bit lost, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that now that you mention it.
Did you come up with any themes for Interstellar?
Yeah, I actually think there's a few themes here. Because of what I mentioned earlier, I think a primary theme is a little harder to figure out, but I'm going to throw a few things out and see what you think about them because I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I think there's the one that's sort of stated, right, which Brand says, which is something about love transcends space and time.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of reflected in more than just her character, right? We see it with Murph and Cooper as well, and how these characters are, through selflessness and through acts of love, are trying to save their loved ones. So I think that's one thing. And then one which I think is tied, let's say maybe more specific theme or more represented in a moment, right? This is where a character has to make a tough decision and they're making it based off of some knowledge they've acquired through the story typically. And it's that they make a momentary decision where it's you're going to win it all or you're going to lose it all. And if I look at it from that perspective, it's when Cooper releases his, vessel from the larger ship so that Brand can be free of the black hole, right? That's his win it all or lose it all, right? We're either going to save her or we're going to go down flames. He's going into the black hole. So that is obviously a sacrifice, right? So I would say from that, sometimes you must be willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to give others a chance to survive, which is, of course, also an act of love. And I see that climactic moment, right? So if I look at that, it was his conscious decision to save Brand and potentially the last hope for humanity. And I think that also ties into a theme I mentioned in The Pit and the Pendulum, which was always keep hope alive and you just might survive. Right? It's kind of the same kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, well, we're kind of screwed here, but maybe, just maybe we'll survive, with this one desperate act, give Brand a chance to go off there and maybe something will come of it. And we see that theme sort of reflected in the repeating line, rage against the dying of the light, right? It's like, don't go gentle into that good night. It's like, always keep that hope alive, always be struggling and striving. And I think at that moment we see that too. So I see kind of those three different themes, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, I like those themes. I think those themes are very good. And I think the theme that I pulled from it is very similar, except that I wanted to, when I was looking at the theme, I wanted to look at it as a compare and contrast between Cooper and Man, because, this whole idea of rage against the dying of the light, we have Man raging against the dying of the light and doing it in a really ugly way. And we have Cooper raging against the dying of the light and doing it in a way that's heroic and full of love. And for me, it's about what is the source, the emotional source of those actions taken, fear or love. And so for me, the theme is the obvious one, that take actions out of love, not fear.
Yeah, I like that. It's also selfishness versus selflessness.
Yes. And they're both doing the same thing. They're both raging against the dying of the light.
Yeah. No, that's
but how
great.
they're doing it.
Yeah, you're right.
Very,
I like that
very
contrast.
different. Man wasn't an antagonist, or he was an antagonist. He wasn't the antagonist. But it was just interesting to see how their two behaviors.
Yeah, that's true. In the Dramatica, are you familiar with Dramatica?
No.
It's a different system for looking at writing and storytelling. And one of the concepts they have is, so you have the protagonist, you have the antagonist, and they introduced this concept. I don't know if that's where it originates from, but that's where I first learned it from, of a contagonist. And the contagonist is someone or some entity that presents an alternate view of what like sort of like the opposite of what the theme is, the opposite of what the message is, the opposite of what the character should learn. So in this case, this character would probably be the antagonist in a sense, is like kind of looking out for yourself, right? Versus looking out for others.
I agree.
Yeah, I like that.
What do you take away from Interstellar as a writer?
Oh man, I think there's a lot to take away. For me, I think again, it's remember the heart of the story. Remember that stories are about characters, their relationships, and their feelings. Because I think for me, the powerful thing in this movie, I love all the science fiction stuff. Like you, I'm a science person. I'm a science fiction person. I really enjoy that. Make you think is like when it hits home, right? When it's, oh, his dad died while he was away, or his daughter's all grown up now. And then when he comes back and sees her at the end, it's like she's much older than him. Like those moments really make you think and make you wonder what it would feel like to be in that position. So that's what I got. What is your writing takeaway?
I have the same thing. Connect the story with the relationships. Because, as you correctly pointed out, it's all about the heart. We like stories with heart, and this one has heart because of the relationships. So, yeah. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the movie Interstellar. As a reminder, the Stories Told podcast is going on hiatus for a couple of weeks at the end of November, so if you don't see a podcast episode drop, fret not. We will be back in early December. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie Wall-E. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.